So, quick story for you guys. We sang a beautiful song every Friday night. We sing it, the Lecha Dodi. Right now, there's a story that I always used to share back in the day. I don't know how many of you guys have heard it. Some of you might have heard it back then, but you've probably forgotten it by now, so that's okay. Some of you might have never heard the story before about the Lecha Dodi. So let me tell it to you guys once again, just as a little something for this Shabbat. If your family hasn't heard it before, you can go home and tell them the story. Okay. So excuse me while I read the story about the Lecha Dodi to you. All right, so this is a true story, by the way. You will not believe this is a true story. After the concluding prayer, Dan quickly walked to the front of the shul in Yerushalayim and said Good Shabbos to the rabbi and a few other people that he knew, and at once made his way towards the back. Time to get home and make kiddush for the family. Food's getting cold. On his way out, a sudden impulse struck him, and he turned around to watch the people filing out. His eyes slowly scanned the shul. Was there anyone who needed a place to eat Shabbos? Who's that sitting towards the side wall over there? I know almost everyone in the shul, but I don't believe he's ever been here before. Dan approached the young man, scanning him with an experienced eye. Dungarees, backpack, dark skin, curly black hair. Looks Sephardi, maybe he's Moroccan. A moment more for consideration, and he was moving towards the boy with his hand extended in welcome. Good Shabbos, good Shabbos. My name is Dan Eisenblatt. Would you like to come spend Shabbos and eat a meal at my house tonight? The young man's face broke in an instant from a worried look to a toothy smile. Yeah, thanks. My name is Machi. The young man picked up his backpack and together they walked out of the shul. A few minutes later, they were all standing around Dan's Shabbos table. As soon as the family started singing Shalom Aleichem, Dan noticed that his guest wasn't singing along. Maybe he's shy. Maybe he can't sing, he surmised. The guest gave another one of his toothy smiles and followed along, limping badly, but obviously trying his best to make up the words. Even after the meal began and the guest had relaxed somewhat, he still seemed a bit fidgety and was mostly silent. Dan picked up the signal and kept the conversation general and centered his remarks on the weekly Torah portion, mixed with small talk about all the current events. After they ate fish, Dan noticed his guest leafing through the songbook, apparently looking for something. So he asked with a smile, Is there a particular song you want us to sing? I can help if you're not sure about the tune. The guest's face lit up. A startling change. There's this one song I'd like to sing, but I can't find it in his book. I really liked what we sang in the synagogue tonight. What was that song called? Something, something, Dodi, Dodi. Dan paused for a moment, on the verge of saying it's not usually sung at the Shabbos table, but then he caught himself. If that's what the kid wants to hear, he thought, what's the harm? So aloud, he said to the kid, You must mean Lecha Dodi. Wait, let me get us some sidduras. Once they had sung the Lecha Dodi, the young man resumed his silence until after the soup. When Dan asked him, Well, what other song would you like to hear tonight? The guest looked embarrassed, and after a bit of encouragement said firmly, I'd really like to hear the Lecha Dodi again. Dan was not really all that surprised when after the chicken he asked the guest for another song, and the young man said again, Lecha Dodi, please. Dan almost blurted out, Let's sing a little softer this time. The neighbors are going to think I'm nuts. Finally, it got to be too much for Dan. Don't you want to sing something else? He suggested to the man. His guest blushed and looked down. I just really like that song. There's just something about it. I really, really like it. In all, they must have sung the Lecha Dodi 8 or 9 times that night. Dan wasn't sure. He lost count. Later, when they had quiet time to talk, Dan said to him, I was just wondering, we haven't had more than a few minutes to chat. Where are you from? And the boy looked pained. Then he stared down at the floor and he said softly, Ramallah. Dan's heart skipped a beat. He was sure he heard the boy say Ramallah, a large Arab city on the West Bank. Quickly he caught himself and then realized that he must have heard him say something else. Ramleh, an Israeli city. Dan said, Oh, Ramleh, I have a cousin there. Do you know Ephraim Warner? He lives on Herzl Street. The young man shook his head sadly. There are no Jews in Ramallah. Dan gasped. He really had said Ramallah. His thoughts were racing. Did he just spend Shabbos with an Arab? Wait a minute. Take a deep breath and let's get things straightened out. Giving his head a quick shake, he told the boy, I'm sorry, but I'm a bit confused. And now that I think of it, I haven't even asked what your full name is. What's your name? The boy looked terrified for a moment, then squared his shoulders and said quietly, Mahmoud ibn Ish Sharif. Mahmoud was looking even more terrified now. Obviously, you could tell what Dan was thinking. Hurriedly, he said, wait. I'm Jewish. I'm just trying to find out where I belong. Dan stood there speechless. What could he say? Mahmoud broke the silence hesitantly. You see, I was born and grew up in Ramallah. I was taught to hate my Jewish oppressors and think that killing them was heroism. But I always had my doubts. I mean, we were taught that the Sunnah, the tradition says, no one of you is a believer until he desires for his brother that which he desires for himself. So I used to sit and wonder, weren't the Yahudis, the Jews, people as well? Didn't they have the right to live the same life as us? If we're supposed to be good to everyone, how come nobody includes the Jews in that? I asked these questions to my father, and he threw me out of the house. Just like that, with nothing but the clothes on my back. By now my mind was made up. I was going to run away and live with the Jews until I could find out what they were really like. So Mahmoud continued. But then I snuck back into the house that night just to get my things in my backpack. But my mother caught me in the middle of packing. She looked pale and upset, but she was quiet and gentle to me. And after a while, she got me to talk. I told her that I wanted to go live with the Jews for a while and find out what they're really like. And maybe I would even want to become one of them. She was turning more and more pale as I said this. And I thought she was angry, but that wasn't it. Something else was hurting her. And she whispered, you don't have to convert and become Jewish. You're already a Jew, my boy. I was shocked. My head started spinning. And for a moment I couldn't speak. Then I stammered, what do you mean, Mom? In Judaism, she told me, if your mother is Jewish, you're Jewish. And boy, I'm Jewish. I never had any idea my mother was Jewish. I guess she didn't want anyone to know. She sure didn't feel good about her life because she whispered suddenly, I made a mistake by marrying an Arab man. In you, that mistake shall be redeemed. My mother always talked that way, poetic-like. She went and dug up some old documents and handed them to me. Things like my birth certificate and her old Israeli ID card, so that I could prove that I was in fact Jewish. I've got them here, but I don't know what to do with them. My mother hesitated about one little piece of paper, and then she said, you may as well take this as well. It's an old photo of my grandparents, which was taken when they went looking for the grave of one of our great ancestors. They went up north and found the grave, and that's when this photo of us was taken. Dan gently put his hand on Mahmoud's shoulder. And Mahmoud looked up at Dan at the Shabbos table, scared and hopeful at the same time. Dan asked him, do you have that photo with you? And the boy's face lit up. Sure, I always carry it with me. He reached in his backpack and pulled out an old tattered envelope. Dan gingerly took the photo from the envelope, picked up his glasses, and looked carefully at the photo. The first thing that stood out was the family group, an old-time Sephardic family from the turn of the century. But then he focused on the grave in the photo that they were standing around. When he read the gravestone inscription, he nearly dropped dead. He rubbed his eyes to make sure, but there was no doubt. This was a grave in the old cemetery up in Tzafat, and the inscription identified it as the grave of the great Kabbalist and the Tzaddik, Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz. Who's Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz? The author of the Lecha Dodi. Dan's voice quivered with excitement as he explained to Mahmoud who his ancestor was. He was a friend of the Arizal, a great Torah scholar, a tzaddik, a mystic. And Mahmoud, your ancestor wrote the song we've been singing this entire Shabbat, Lecha Dodi. No wonder you wanted to hear it over and over again. This time it was Mahmoud's turn to be struck speechless. Dan slowly stood up from the bed, still in awe about what had happened. He extended his trembling hand and said, welcome home, Mahmoud. Now how about picking a new name for yourself? A little bit more Jewish. So, true story this, guys. Mahmoud eventually changed his name. He enrolled in yeshiva in Jerusalem, where he studied diligently to catch up on his Jewish education. He got married to a nice Jewish girl, and he gained popularity as a lecturer. Recounting a dramatic story, he eventually had to flee the land of Israel due to threats against his life by members of his Arab family. I leave you guys with that story. Shabbat Shalom.